morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where after Friday's all Marvel movie news episode, I've prepared a bit of a palate cleanser for you. However, rest assured, there is one comic book movie news story today. However, in keeping with that palate cleanser theme, it's not Marvel or DC related. Instead, it has to do with our old pal, Mark Millar. But before we get to him, we're going to start out with live-action fairy tales. And I want to take this opportunity to remind you to hand in your BTT voice submission for the upcoming episode, which focuses on Disney's live-action Beauty and the Beast set for 2017. So once again, I've already gotten a bunch of great entries, so I just want to remind you, if you'd like to participate, to get yours in by the end of this week. Submissions are due end of day, Sunday, March 29th. So what you do is you record yourself for about 30 seconds talking about Disney's live-action Beauty and the Beast, what you like about it, what you don't like about it, whatever you want to say. Then upload it to YouTube, that approximately 30-second video, and have it be unlisted. Not private, unlisted. And then send that unlisted link to me at grace@gracerandolph.com. Again, you have until the end of this week, the very end of it, Sunday night, to get those submissions in. So why are we talking about live-action fairy tales today? Well, I know that a lot of you don't like live-action fairy tales. You feel, leave the classics alone. However, there's so much money in play here, and these films are doing so well. You'll see on Movie Math later today that Insurgent probably wishes Cinderella had not opened the week before, that there's some good coming of it. Now, I like live-action fairy tales, but I think we can all agree that this unexpected evolution is something we can all get behind. And that's that the live-action fairy tale market is bleeding out into Shakespeare, because Joe Roth, one of the premier producers of live-action fairy tales, has decided that that's going to be the next place he applies this formula. And I think it's a great idea. Now, who is Joe Roth? Well, Joe Roth used to be a studio suit over at Disney, and now he's a major prolific producer. He's kind of like Amy Pascal a few years down the road. You know, she was booted out of Sony, now she has her own shingle, and she should only hope to do as well as Joe Roth has done. So Roth produced the first live-action fairy tale that really worked out. That's Alice in Wonderland for Disney. Huge hit, billion-dollar club member, one of the first billion-dollar club members, by the way. Then he went on to produce Oz the Great and Powerful, Maleficent for Disney. He's doing sequels for both Oz and Alice for Disney. Alice is shooting right now, that sequel. But then also over at Universal, he set up the Snow White. Well, it's becoming a franchise, The Huntsman. That comes out in summer 2016. So, very prolific individual. But like anyone in any industry, there comes a point where you realize you must evolve or die. So he's like, the live-action fairy tale market's not going to last forever. What's my next move? And I think brilliantly he's decided that, again, it's Shakespeare. So he has a project now, actually, speaking of Sony, set up at Sony, and that's called Verona, and it's going to be an adaptation, a stylized adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. Now, it's going to be hard to top what Baz Luhrmann did with it back in the day with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. That's a very well-known and regarded film, largely for what it did for those two individuals' careers, and also one of the movies that cemented the strong relationship between Luhrmann and DiCaprio. However, it wasn't a huge box office hit, so I think there's still room here for this movie. But it does have to contend with that memory. But anyway, so how are they going to do this? Well, they're obviously going to have the sumptuous stylization of a live-action fairy tale. But they've decided to add a twist of 300 to it. And they want to have that type of stylization, which makes sense considering that Romeo and Juliet is based on, it's a fight at the beginning of the play, which causes a lot of problems, and that the Montagues and Capulets are two warring families. So I think to take it in that direction makes a lot of sense, and I think that stylization I think will help differentiate it from the live-action fairy tales. Also, spoiler alert, Romeo and Juliet does not have the happiest of endings. So I think you want something a little grittier and edgier to go along with that. I think if done properly, this could be quite successful for Sony and Joe Roth. I think it's a great idea. I think Shakespeare is a great place to take this type of formula movie making, and I think it's something that we can all benefit from. We'll see what kind of dialogue they use. Hopefully they could get a good screenwriter on it. I mean, you obviously want to represent the material well, but I think this is another good way to introduce Shakespeare to audiences. You know, Kenneth Branagh, of course, has done his work, doing some wonderful adaptations of the Bard's plays, many plays. But I think that a more highbrow, or I mean, high concept, sorry. I think people will debate whether or not this is highbrow, but a more high concept approach, a blockbuster approach, could be really interesting. So I love it. I think it's a great idea. And they should see if Noah Murrow is available. He directed 300 Rise of an Empire. Not a fantastic film, but I think a very good, solid, enjoyable film, and really a visual feast. So I'm curious to what you guys think. Do you think this is some good to come out of the live-action fairy tale trend? Which, by the way, I personally enjoy. What do you think of this happening to Shakespeare? Do you agree that it's great, or are you like, oh no, not Shakespeare too? And then, of course, do you trust Joe Roth to be at the helm of this? I like the work he's done quite a bit, so I'm excited. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day has to do, as I said, with Mark Millar and his ever-expanding comic book movie empire. We're actually going to talk more about him later this week, but right now I want to talk about one project in particular with Mark Millar, and that's his Chrononauts comic that just was released via his Millar World banner, and which already has a movie deal. It was announced the day the comic came out. I bought the comic before I heard about the movie deal because I not only like Mark Millar's work, I mean, I don't enjoy it 100% of the time, but I think it's consistent enough that I always check out what he's doing. And also he has Sean Murphy. He gets the best artists to work with, and I think Sean Murphy does a fantastic job with his art, and so that's another reason that I purchased it. But then lo and behold, I see a headline that it's already set up at Universal, with Chris Morgan producing. Chris Morgan actually wrote Wanted, adapted from a Mark Millar comic, quite famously, and then also scripted several of the Fast and Furious films. No word if he's going to write this adaptation, but he is going to produce it over at Universal. And I have to tell you, when I saw the headline, I was sort of annoyed. I was like, man, this already has a movie deal, and it kind of made me feel, you know, like it was just not a real comic. I was like, oh man, you made me pay for your pitch. I should just see this when it's a movie. It just annoyed me. I wish that these things would come out first and then become movie deals. I think that it's almost like, you know, they hand in storyboards and, you know, concept art design and pitches now, and then they call it a comic and they bundle it up and make it available for us to pay. I would be like, you know, just give this away for free in hopes that I pay to see your movie. I kind of didn't like it. And I think it's interesting to see this evolution happening in the comic book industry, which is similar to what's happened obviously in the literary industry, where books are often sold to movie studios before they ever hit the stand. You know, they send out advance copies to development departments, and they sometimes offer, well, the idea is there's a bidding war, but as long as just one movie studio wants your book, you're in good shape. And then they use that to help sell the book. But we're not seeing a lot of this being used to sell the comic book, which is another area where I think comic books emulate a bad habit, but don't get the reward aspects of the bad habit. So I'm like, you're not even using this angle to sell the comic at least. But, you know, I'm curious, if you know that a comic book's going to become a movie, will you read the comic if you know you have the movie coming down the line? Interesting situation to find ourselves in. So what do I think of Chrononauts? Well, I haven't finished it. I was up so late last night, I only got to read like half of it. But I thought it was medium. The setup is like in the near future, these two like rock star scientists, because it's Mark Millar, create this time-traveling device. But they get lost in time, so it's their crazy hijinks going to famous periods in time and interacting with famous historical characters. Now here's the weird thing. They're two ridiculously buff scientists. They're in such good shape, and they're both so good looking that as I started to read the comic, I was like, are they a gay couple? And then I thought that would be really interesting. I was like, oh, what an inventive thing to do, Mark Millar. You know, to show these guys on this road trip through time and maybe how different people adapt to their lifestyle, where they're accepted, where they're not. And just, you know what? How about having some characters that happen to be gay where that's not the most important thing about them? It's just a part of who they are. So, alas, though, was not the case. They were just two guys who happened to work out together and also work out their minds together. So, odd character choice. The other reason I think it's odd is that two really buff guys who wear like really tight t-shirts and who are scientists are, I think, the most sympathetic people in people you could pick. I also don't think they're the most cinematically compelling. And I'd also like to point out to Mark Millar and Chris Morgan, whoever's making this movie, that he finally has a real genuine success with Kingsman: The Secret Service, and I think that's largely because he has Colin Firth as an unlikely action hero, who comes across, by the way, quite charming and likable and attractive, even though he's not super buff and has a tight t-shirt on. So I think that it was that twist on a stereotype that worked so well for Kingsman. So I would implore them to consider that when adapting Chrononauts for the big screen. If Sean Murphy and Mark Millar wanted to have these rock star scientists, that's fine, but I don't think it's the best choice for the movie. So I'm curious, have you read the comic? What did you think of the comic? Are you not going to read the comic now because you know it's going to be a movie? And also, if you have read the comic, what did you think of it? And what do you think of this idea of pitching comics to movie studios and having them picked up before we even get a look at it? All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day has to do with Netflix. And there's a very interesting article in The Hollywood Reporter, actually, about the realities of a deal with Netflix for movie distribution. And I've included a link to that in the video description if you'd like to read it in full. But we're going to discuss the highlights. So basically, The Hollywood Reporter decided to look into what it's actually like to get a movie deal with Netflix, and if it's as wonderful as Netflix is saying it is. And of course, the people who just sign those deals are saying it is. Because of course, they're not going to be like, man, this isn't what I was thinking of when I made this movie, but they shoved so much money in my face, how could I say no? That really seems to be the reality of it right now, where Netflix is just writing checks that are so large that, independent films and producers, the producers behind those independent films, find it too hard to say no. They paid 200% of the budget for the Beasts of No Nation. They paid a considerable amount of money for other projects recently, and I think that that's why they're able to acquire these films. Now, there's a couple of problems. Now, one of the things the article mentions is saying, hey, ideally, if you just want people to see your movie, then Netflix is a great place because they can see your movie for free, basically, because they're already Netflix subscribers, and they have a very large subscriber base. So if your only goal in life is to get people to see your work, well then, you should be thrilled to be with Netflix. But I would like to add to that that if your only goal is for people to see your work, then why don't you release it online for free? That way, hundreds of millions of people will see your work, because that's obviously a real incentive to watch a high-quality piece of entertainment for no money, streamed wherever you might be at your convenience. So let's not kid ourselves. Money is certainly important here, even when it comes to Netflix. So the real situation is twofold. One, if Netflix is only doing a limited release in art house theaters, not only because they don't want to, have everybody see it in theaters instead of on their platform, but also because theaters won't play these films because they don't want to help Netflix out, then is your movie really like a quote-unquote movie? Or have you really just made a direct-to-video film, right? There's that stigma that Netflix is going to have to overcome. But then this is where things get really interesting, and this is what I particularly liked about the article and why I'm bringing it up today, and that's, where's the revenue stream? There's obviously no back end in a Netflix film because nobody pays to rent your particular film, so there are no numbers that can be pointed to. What cut of a subscriber or a membership due would be allotted to you, right? How can you determine that? So basically, Netflix might be paying a ton of money up front, but that's because there's no money coming on later down the line. There's no back end, there's no dividends, there's no gross participation, because there's nothing for you to look at. There is no gross for you guys to even argue over how to cut up. So that's a really big departure from a very tried and true formula that Hollywood has been using since basically its inception. So, well, I guess maybe not since its inception, but since the beginning of the free agent era of filmmaking when the studio system went away. So this is a very big change. So that's something else, So I think that Netflix is going to have to, and this was also discussed in the article, have a situation where they have to pay even more upfront in terms of salaries. Like Adam Sandler, we don't know the specifics about Adam Sandler's deal. Maybe he does get a cut of, but how would you determine that? He couldn't possibly get a cut of membership dues. So he's going to have to get a really strong salary up front. Or maybe Netflix just said, here are your box office numbers recently. You should be happy we're offering you a deal. I doubt that's how it went down. That's how it should go down. But you can be sure that Netflix has paid a considerable salary to Adam Sandler up front because, again, there's no money coming on later down the line. So I think this is a really interesting situation. I think there's a whole lot of different things that need to be worked out logistically. And then also just in terms of how people feel. It's important, image is a big part of Hollywood, not just with people in their careers within the business, but also how the audience feels about a movie. Image is really important. So I think it's really going to be the biggest hurdle for Netflix is how do we feel about a Netflix movie? Is it a real movie? And how do people feel who make Netflix movies? Do they feel they've made a real movie, or have they made a direct-to-video film? I think it's something that has to be worked out. So I think that the solution could end up being, by the way, that maybe Netflix will charge per rental. That's something that Amazon does, and people are saying that Amazon perhaps might be in a better situation to get content because of it, because there will be back-end, there will be revenue that can be pointed to because it actually exists. So Netflix might not be able to keep its current model if they really want to expand in this way. But maybe they have so much money and can expand in this way because they do offer this stuff for free basically to their subscribers. Really, really, it's a really big, intense bundle of string, and we'll see how it gets unknotted if it can. So those are the 3 stories of the day. The viewer question comes from Sean Cotter. And Sean says, question, hey Grace, Sean Cotter here from Ireland. Awesome. Hello, Ireland. I hope you had a wonderful St. Patrick's Day recently. And then Sean says, why is Emma Watson doing the Beauty and the Beast movie? This is great. It ties in with the BTT voice, so you can think about this yourself and comment on it if you want in your submission. So Sean says, it's not that long ago she made her feminism speech to the UN, stating how strong a feminist she is. Why make a movie of a woman kidnapped by a dominant male beast? Keep up the great work, and I watch morning movie news every day. I'd also love for you to answer my question because it's St. Patrick's Day yesterday. Oh, awesome. So you did have a great St. Patrick's Day. Sorry for the delay, Sean, but as you can see, I did not forget about your question. And then he put a smiley face, which you all know I love so much. All right, so Sean, really interesting question. And it's actually, I'm going to loop something else in as well, because I think it also is something that's being discussed with this current push for women being, wanting to be represented in a more natural, unbiased, anti-feminist way. But as for Emma Watson, I think she managed to pick one of the least offensive fairy tales when it comes to feminism of the group. And I can see you wanting to say it's a woman kidnapped by a dominant male beast, but I don't really think that's the situation, especially when you take a look at the way it goes from the Disney animated adaptation. And also, Stephen Chbosky's writing this. He wrote Perks of Being a Wallflower, and you can bet he's going to write really strong characters across the board. Hopefully you're going to see a situation which appeals to everyone, not just women or not just men. But what I wanted to say is that the beast has taken Belle's father, and Belle has the strength and the courage to exchange herself. Say, I will be your prisoner in exchange for my father's freedom. That's a very brave thing to do. It's a risky thing to do, and I think it's important to point out that it was a guy who was kidnapped first, and it's Belle's idea to do the swap. Also, based on how the story turns out, I wouldn't say the beast is so dominant. I think part of the problem is that he thinks he's dominant because of his temper and brute force, but I think that Belle shows their strength in other ways. She's a quiet character, but an incredibly strong character. The way she stands up to Gaston, the way she won't be won over just by his popularity and good looks in the village that she lives in, and the way she stands up to him, and the way she stands up to the beast. I think there's a lot of strength and courage there. They might not be sometimes, I think a lot of times women are like, oh, I want to be in the midst of battle. But I think there's all different types of courage. And that's one of the great things about the Hunger Games franchise, that it shows that Katniss might not be someone who always leaps into action and is the first to do so, but she has a quiet strength and resolve as well. And sometimes the most brave people are the ones who are the most afraid and overcome those fears. Although I wouldn't categorize Belle as a fearful character at all. But I think there's really a lot of dynamics at play here, and I think she's actually chosen a great property for someone who considers herself a feminist. However, I might be wrong here, because this just occurred to me, but I believe that Emma Watson also made quite a point to say that guys who support women shouldn't feel that there's anything wrong with that guys can be feminists too. And that was a really important statement to make. So I think that Emma Watson isn't like one of those man-hater feminists that I think all women fear becoming. I think she's just someone who strives for equality. And I think she's also was trying to maybe take away some of the stigma that is associated with the term feminist. And so I think Beauty and the Beast is a wonderful property for her to choose. Now, what I wanted to add on to this discussion is something else that's been discussed lately, and that's that there are people talking about maybe women, is it fair for them to be asked on the red carpet who they're wearing? Is that a degrading comment? And a lot of fashion houses came out and said, no, this is a business exchange. That dress each actress is wearing was given to her for free, and sometimes she's even paid to wear it. And fashion houses work for weeks to get just the right outfit that will make a splash and get a lot of attention for the actress, so her photo goes everywhere, and also is fit and tailored to her specifically to make sure she looks her best. So that was a lot of work done, and they need the shout out. That's why they did all that work. That's why they paid the actress, or at least gave her the dress for free. And so because that's a business exchange, she needs to mention the dress. Now, if actresses truly want this to go away, they need to stop accepting free dresses and just purchase off the rack and not make that business deal. However, that's a big part of revenue and income for a lot of actresses, so I can see why they wouldn't want to do that. So I would say that maybe, this is, again, a situation where you want to have a good compromise. So maybe ask an actress what she's wearing, and then we can move on to a different topic, right? I think it's just spend a little more time with the talent, and that way you can cover everything. I think fashion is a big part of these awards shows. People enjoy looking at the fashions, and it's a really big thing for the fashion industry. So I don't think we should put a negative connotation on that. When we discuss feminism and girl power and women wanting to be equals, I think it's a very tricky conversation to have in every instance, just with like this fairy tale and just like with dresses on the red carpet. I think you don't want to go too far in either direction. All right, so thank you so much for your question, Sean. Great question. I hope you like the answer. I'm looking forward. I hope you'll submit for BTT Voice. Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in today. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question. I hope you enjoyed this palette cleanser. And then, of course, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.